One of these has gotta go. Mega Evolution, Z-Moves, Regional Variants, or Dynamax. Now I might be wondering why I'm making a video about this, and it's because Dynamax is trending on Twitter. So me and many other people were very surprised to see anything Pokemon related trending, and it's because of this tweet right here. 3,000 likes, actually more retweets than likes, tons of quote tweets, and also many replies. Who knew if you put something divisive on Twitter, it would start discussion and then get something Pokemon trending? But you can kinda get an idea as to what the most popular picks are, because Dynamax is also trending with Z-Moves. And that's generally what you hear from the Pokemon community about what needs to go out of this assortment. I actually don't even think regional variants is necessary here, but I think it just kind of shows like if people really want their Mega Evolutions, they will do anything to get it back. I'll get rid of Z-Moves, regional variants, and Dynamax just to get Mega Evolution back. Man, I get rid of Dynamax and Z-Moves for free. So that becomes like the real discussion. Well, Mega Evolution or regional variants? Because there could actually be like a viability thing or a Pokemon recognition debate between these, and then to a lot, people just kind of throw these ones away immediately. But I don't think it's that simple. So I mean, this video is just going to be a dive into what's gone on with these mechanics, all the other fun things going on, and just kind of responding to it. But I don't appreciate the hypocrisy of this tweet right here, because a lot of the Bring Back National Dex people, they're just saying like, oh, Game Freak's removing features and they're just, killing off all these things in the game and we're getting less content for more money. But if you get rid of 3 to replace 1, that kind of goes against what these people are talking about. And generally, it's just, the National Dex derangement immediately hating anything Generation 8 and over-hating on the Dynamax, even though it's one of the best features we've ever had introduced in Pokemon. So we're going to start getting into this discussion, and here's kind of where I stand about it. Regional variants made old Pokemon viable, Z-Moves even made Splash usable, Dynamax Gigantamax made every Pokemon to be good and have strategies involving their moves and abilities, and this is why I love it so much. It adds so much versatility, and it accomplishes what Megas didn't, because Megas killed the meta, took power creep and speed creep to a new level, and created OP messes. You should know, and then the person that started it, bye-bye Dynamax, Megas outclassed you. Well, we're going to talk about why you're wrong, but, you can kind of see that a lot of different opinions have been talked about, but mostly it's people hating on Dynamax, and then just also yeah, Z-Moves were pretty useless. As for me, my initial reaction is Z-Moves, but I gotta say Mega Evolutions, man, they just did not work. Mega Evolutions are a massive failure, and I'm honestly surprised that people wanted them back after complaining about them while they were here. So the first thing I want to talk about are the Z-Moves, because that's where I initially went okay, I'm cutting Z-Moves because they were terrible, and I'm wondering, how different Z-Moves would have been if Mega Evolution wasn't in the game. Because the biggest thing I hate about Z-Moves was that it was power creep and also feature creep for no reason on top of keeping Mega Evolutions around. 1/3 of everyone's team had dedicated item slots and one-dimensional strategy. That's not good for the game, and it also made it even worse. If you're only bringing one Pokemon that can Mega to the table, well, you've already figured out a lot of what the opponent is up to, because there's no reason to not Mega any Pokemon battle, since it was a core feature of Generation 6 and still very predominant in Generation 7. They put all of that power into those Pokemon for a reason, and you pretty much have to use them or else you are massively disadvantaged. And then that also makes it easier to kind of predict which Pokemon is going to have the Z Crystal, so you were effectively just creating a lot of gating that didn't kind of pay out or had a lot of weird consequences on the game. So I mean, people look at the max moves from Dynamax oh, they just put Z moves back in. Well, they put more diverse Z moves in that could give you some strategy without the overwhelming power. Even if you have a Life Orb Pokemon using a max move, it's not going to be as much as some of the Z moves that people would use. And because choice items and other effects don't come into play when a Pokemon is Dynamaxed, it's a lot more balanced than just kind of having a very powerful nuke that only strong Pokemon utilize. Pretty much any Pokemon is going to benefit in some way from the effects of Dynamax and then increase viability, but if you just take a strong Pokemon and make it stronger, then you just give it the Z Crystal and you're good to go right there. And also it kind of created even less diversity and less strategy, because well, you're not going to give certain Pokemon certain Z moves when they're just better off with a Choice Scarf or Choice Item or a Life Orb or anything else like that. So it really just kind of reduced a lot of the options, and then just removed counterplay by giving such power even though it's only one time in a battle. It just kind of brought a lot of disruption. The special Z moves were pretty much never used, either because the Pokemon itself wasn't viable or the effect wasn't strong enough and they just put a stronger nuke on a stronger Pokemon. And the status moves, they were a complete joke, because here's the really interesting thing about Z moves, and also why I put it above Mega Evolution. When it came to Fan Fridays, people came up with the plays. People came up with some really interesting stuff. Like Z Sand Attack was one of my favorite things to see, because you lower the opponent's accuracy and then you buff your own evasion, and which is actually stronger than going for a +2 evasion boost. So if you did that one turn, you get more value than a minimize, and then you'd be able to pull off all kinds of other weird things from there. There were also some really cool ones like that raise all stats and kind of set up for some other things. So people were really tricky about it, but other than that, like, some status moves didn't really get enough of a buff. And there were still some really cool things that came out of it. Z on Togekiss is one of the best things I've ever seen, and also Z Trick Room into the accuracy boosted Hypnosis. You could pull out some really cool stuff like that, but then there's just a lot of things that didn't feel strong enough, didn't really have the right amount of tuning, and just the complete joke of this. Instead of like Game Freak actually trying to make some of the stronger moves like Cotton Spore or Tail Glow and then give it a little bit extra on top of it, some of the other ones, you know, it's like Amnesia. What if Amnesia just became a +3 special defense just once? Maybe added a little bit of defense that we can balance out a Pokemon. You know, Recover, not having any kind of extra benefit, Minimize. So you don't even get a +3 evasion, even though the opponent can respond with a Z move and then nuke out your evasion boosting Pokemon. So I mean, there was a lot of just weird things that you couldn't even do. So like, most of the status moves that were used were completely unusable as a Z move. Some were usable, some Pokemon just got to do it. And then again, it's just kind of like your whole strategy is reliant on the item and then that Z move strategy. So just kind of meh overall. Like I said, I wonder how it would have been without Megas. Like if we didn't have to dedicate a Mega as well as a Z move, would there have been more fun around the Z moves instead of, well, my Mega is just stronger anyways and my Z move is going to be used just kind of like nuke one of your Pokemon that's strong against my Mega and then call it good right there. And with Dynamax, you're kind of getting that effect for all types of moves instead of my Grass Pokemon has Grass EMZ. And then I do the thing and then it's all or nothing. So we got it like that. Alolan, or Galarian forms, or regional variants. I'm just kind of tired of talking about Z moves. I think we understand, but what I wanted to make clear about the Z moves, I don't think it's like an open and shut case. Like, alright, if we're not being deranged about Dynamax, Z moves are the worst, GG. It's like, it had a really bad implementation. I'm happy it's gone, but there were still like a lot of like good things about it, and like some of the most weird strategy surprises came from it, but I still don't find it healthy or compelling for the game at all. But then when we get into like regional variants, I feel like Game Freak put a lot of care with the Alolan regional variants to make sure that the base Pokemon was honored and then updated in a really compelling and nice way, but also like not too overshadowing and still really cool. Like Alolan Marowak is one of the best Pokemon ever made, especially if you're considering like the Lavender Town lore, design, and then just kind of like the feel of the Pokemon. Super awesome. And yeah, they just kind of like kept everything very consistent with a lot of successful Pokemon. I wish it was more than just Generation 1, and I wish there were more Alolan Pokemon introduced. But then when we get to the Galarian, there's still some really cool ones here. Like, dude, Farfetch'd as just like a total unit, it's awesome. I never really liked Mr. Mime, like Mr. Mime and Mr. Rhyme, kind of like whatever over it. Love Weezing. The Ponyta evolutionary line, wonderful. I don't like the Meowth one. Meowth already had, like, the better one was in Alola. This was one of the coolest things, just kind of like watching this evolutionary line play out. And the thing is, I don't like Darmanitan. I don't like Galarian Darmanitan, but that Zen mode, it makes me laugh every time. Like, I enjoy it in a way that I didn't expect. Yamask was really cool. I like the design update that they have for that. And they made Stunkfist not the worst Pokemon ever. So you can't, oh yeah, and Corsola. Like, this is a massive win for the evolutionary line. I like the legendary birds as well. Articuno, actually, I like the regular Articuno the most. Zapdos is the same, but Moltres is a massive upgrade. And then we still have, like, more Pokemon kind of announced. I like what they did with Slowbro. So it's like, yeah, this is successful. This shouldn't even be in the discussion as to what needs to be removed. But if that's not in the discussion, that means Mega Evolution is. And that's because Mega Evolution failed. And the reason why I say Mega Evolution failed is because the Pokemon was either useless, pointless, and not worth being the only one you can bring to a battle, or it was overtuned. Now, there are some, like, in-between Pokemon. Like, I would say Mega Venusaur, probably the most balanced Mega Pokemon, but then you just have, like, Mega Charizard X. this thing's just ridiculous. Mega Blastoise, fairly useless. I'm sorry, Berto. Some people can make it work, but for the most part, it's like you're not going to bring a Mega Blastoise to a competitive battle when there's all of these other options there. Alakazam. Alakazam used to be one of the greatest Pokemon in competitive, got power crept out, and couldn't even come back with a Mega Evolution upgrade, and was so scared, like Game Freak was so scared of this guy, they only gave him 90 base stat total bonus instead of 100. Mega Gengar wasn't really that great, and like regular Gengar was about as viable, but then you just get into those cases where it's like the Pokemon is completely unviable without it. So we get into Mega Kangaskhan. Regular Kangaskhan was really never in any kind of competitive discussion, and then Mega Kangaskhan just ended up everywhere in singles and doubles and world champion teams and stuff like that, and then needed a nerf, and it was still pretty predominant, and then saw resurgence in Pokemon Let's Go being one of the best Megas again. So that was the thing. Pinsir had a run in the beginning, and then you never saw it because, like, well, once Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire came out, there were more Megas added in. That just reduced the usability of the fringe Pokemon like Mega Pinsir. Mega Gyarados can take over games. I know we're going to get in Dynamax where it's like, well, Dynamax Pokemon can set up an Airstream and then get like a stat boost and then still win, but it's not as fast. It's not as active. It's not as zero counterplay as what we saw with Mega Evolutions because, like, you get the right Pokemon with just a touch of setup, and it completely takes off, makes the game unfun. Mega Aerodactyl, not used in Generation 6 or 7, oppressive in Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. Really weird like that. Mewtwo's banned anyways. Ampharos had some cool like, we could just go through the list. I could do a separate video about all this, but you know what I'm talking about, to where it's like, you only saw a select few Megas, the other ones were kind of fringe, and then there were just ones that were completely unviable, no play, no matter what you did. Audino being a pretty good example. You know, it's like the healer ability. Well, I can't bring it to singles, so there we go. And healer is a whatever ability in doubles. Mega Houndoom might as well just not existed. Mega Glalie might not have existed. And the thing is, they had really cool designs. Like, these as new Pokemon designs, I really appreciate. I feel like Megas worked really well in a way similar to Alolan forms, except you never got to experience them. I can have all of the new Alolan forms I like on my team and actively play with them, but with Megas, it's only like one of these Pokemon exists at a time, despite them being really cool updates and redesigns of a lot of Pokemon that I think also kind of captures the spirit of that Pokemon, that honors that Pokemon better than Alolan forms, because it's just about being true to that Pokemon. However, this is where the failure comes into play, because the implementation was just not there. And a lot of the Pokemon that got Megas couldn't really feel the love because they were just being outclassed by the other Megas that were ruining the game. So it just became a really weird way of playing Pokemon, because like there was strategy involved. There were times where like if you were adapting and you were in it, it was still pretty fun, but for the most part it still like didn't feel as good as just other more traditional Pokemon battles, because it effectively just became like posturing until your Mega takes off, and that determines a large amount of the battle. Can you shut down opponent's Mega Pokemon and then still have a chance? Yeah, but it didn't really, like, it just kind of changed up. Even like 6v6 and 3v3s just got even worse. And 3v3s with Z moves and Megas in Gen 7, oh, 2/3 of your team going to do a thing, and it just did not feel satisfying in any stage of the Pokemon battles. I will say that Megas were probably the most enjoyable with Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, because you didn't have this over-bloated, over-tuned roster. No abilities just kind of meant that the Pokemon were running on each other's stats. No items meant that there were like any weird guessing games and stuff. Like, you just ran your Pokemon. One of them got to be a little more powerful, not like exponentially powerful off the abilities or synergies with like other abilities and items on your team and stuff. It was just like a really honest match with the Megas, and then the reduced roster kind of removed a lot of the power creep and issues that we saw. Yeah, there were still some Pokemon that were a little too strong because the future generation, you know, counters to them didn't really exist anymore. But for the most part, it was like, yeah, this is balanced, this is straightforward. And it was also making me wonder, like, okay, I feel like you could have also made Megas work really well in Generation 7 if once your Pokemon switches out, the Mega goes away. And I think that might have been a really crucial way of balancing Megas that just really didn't happen. And the weird thing is that because of the natural power that a lot of the Pokemon have, you can't really have that power and give them an item on top of it. So like make it to where they don't have to hold a Mega Stone, but can still have items in like modern non-Let's Go Pokemon games. I don't think would really work out unless they did like we see with Dynamax, that if all items instead of just certain items are disabled, maybe Mega Evolutions could have worked out. I really do think that Mega Pokemon once they switch out, like, that's your big gamble. That's your big gambit. You can either get more or less power than Dynamax, depending on, like, if you do it too early, if you do it at the right or wrong time. You might get 5 turns of Mega, you might get 1 turn of Mega, and then that can have less of an oppressive feel on the game, but also still be very decisive. Like, if your sweeper gets in and doesn't leave, well, then you still sweep, but it means that, like, you have to take that gamble. You have to commit to your decision, or else, you just kind of wasted it. And it does put a limit on the amount of power that you can get out of Mega Evolutions, but overall, I just kind of consider it a failure for the many reasons I listed. Like, yeah, I was having fun using Sableye, but it's also just kind of, like, pretty uncompetitive, because here's how I go. I lead Mega Sableye. If you did not bring a Talonflame, Charizard X, or Sylveon, I just win the game. So there was also a lot of gambles like that, where it's like, okay, I'm just going to bring this Mega, and if my opponent isn't bringing X Pokemon, my chances to win drastically go up. I won with it, I had fun slapping people with Sableye, but it wasn't good for the game, and Megas really are not good for the game. Like, yeah, maybe they can come back, they would need some massive changes, they had a successful implementation in Pokemon Let's Go. Again, it also kind of like goes to the weird things with Z moves, but then that's why I really like Dynamax. I don't think there's been any gimmick that's brought more balance to competitive Pokemon than just Dynamax. Even though if we're talking about gimmicks, it's just Z moves and Mega Evolutions, I think it does take the best of both, but also has counterplay. And that counterplay is in your opponent Dynamaxing. That if one of your opponent's sweepers gets out of control, whether or not they Dynamax, you can actually bring in a Pokemon, and that health gain makes pretty much every kind of viability work. Bulky Pokemon don't really get like 1 or 2 shot anymore. Sweeper Pokemon can survive the hit they need, and it might be against the Pokemon that would otherwise just run them over, so you can salvage a lot of opportunities, and you can also create a lot of play for a lot of different Pokemon. Less viable Pokemon get maybe the thing that they were missing off of either the move effect, the setup into that Dynamax, or also just the amount of health. Like that health translates into so many stats, or so many effective stats, and so much usability that it could just save a Pokemon from something else that it couldn't really do. And that's why I also like that, the abilities are consistent. It's not like Megas where it's like, oh, this Mega is only viable because it ends up with a busted ability that also synergizes with its overtuned stats. And then it kind of like makes it kind of kick off from there. But the way that you can get it back and forth, the way that you can respond to people is really good, and also does still give you that amount of power where, like, yeah, you can have just a Gyarados come in, do an Airstream or two, and have a Dragon Dance beforehand, or Airstream into Moxie and finish off a low Pokemon, and still find a sweep, but then the response can be a Dynamax electric move or a rock move that gets enough power on the non-Mega Gyarados, and then finally kind of put it under control. Because if you're talking about Pokemon that's gaining double its health, well, that means you're having to offset that with a +2 or +3, and then, that means that the opponent can't just, like, take off in a game as fast. But then you look at Mega Gyarados, it does the same thing, it just does 2 Dragon Dances, and then you win. Under certain circumstances, kind of like anything that just kind of gets the setup. And I also like that Max Guard works really well because, it's not like the Z moves. I did kind of complain where it's like, oh, when it comes to the Z moves, the thing about the status move reset is a complete joke. But even though all status moves become Max Guard, I think it works out way better instead of just kind of like leaving some of these moves hanging when other moves got like really good usability off of the Z move, or just kind of like at least synergize a little bit, or we're just not used at all. With this, it's just kind of a really good way of simplifying it and also giving a Pokemon something that it needs. Being able to just pull a Protect out of nowhere when you really need to is one of the most valuable things for certain Pokemon, and it can salvage games. It has a lot of play in doubles where it's like, oh, this is my primary Dynamax Pokemon, then that means I don't have to carry Protect, so I open up another move slot, or I can use my status to my advantage, and then do some other things with that, or even to stall out the opponent's Dynamax. You predict the opponent's Dynamax into a Max Guard. That has some big plays because maybe you don't want to utilize the Dynamax as much, so if you can like block one of your opponent's turns, you can slow them down and kind of bring it off of that. And then you just see like crazy interactions as well, where it's like if you can predict when an opponent's Dynamaxing and play that to your advantage, that's going to be massive for you. If you can just kind of respond to an opponent's Dynamax or respond to an opponent's sweep, it gives you a lot. So it does kind of increase the amount of competitive diversity. The bonus effects, they can either stack with yourself, stack in doubles, stack with allies, do some really crazy things. And I just haven't found it to be as oppressive and as overwhelming or as unbalanced as what I saw with Mega Evolutions. and it's a lot more engaging than Z moves as well. And I just had this thought as I was editing the video, but Dynamaxing is a lot more exciting when it happens in battle than Mega Evolution. Now I know that people give Dynamax a lot of flack because they just go, oh, it's a big Pokemon. And yeah, the Dynamax Pokemon and even Gigantamax Pokemon don't look as cool as Mega Evolutions, but when a Pokemon Mega Evolves, again, they can just switch out and come back in, so it's not like this is the play. When a Pokemon Dynamaxes, it can happen at any time. Like with a Mega Evolution, you generally want to Mega Evolve the second that Pokemon hits the field. A Dynamax, that Pokemon can be around for a little bit and then be like, oh, here comes the dude's play. This is where it's like you kind of really try to get a swing, you try to really determine what's going to happen for the rest of the battle, and then there's also, thrill to it. There's a little bit of anticipation as to what's going on because you only have 3 turns, and you have to make it count as much as possible. And because the opponent can Dynamax, it doesn't really feel as scripted. It's not like every time a Gyarados hits the field, it's like, alright, here comes the Gyarados Airstream into the Moxie, and then that's game. No, it's like, well, the opponent can still make a good switch onto that. The opponent still has the chance to Dynamax, or even Dynamax at the exact same time, and get the prediction to cancel out the opponent's aggressive, too predictable play with their Dynamax. It feels like the battle is just beginning from the Dynamax instead of, oh, this battle is over because of the Mega Evolution. Hey, you brought out Charizard. Is that Charizard X? Yep. Is that the Dragon Dance? Yeah. Does the opponent have a response? No. Okay. Game over. It's just kind of silly stuff like that you don't really have happen as much just because of the existence of Dynamax and Mega Evolutions not being in the game. Also, when it comes to Pokemon, because I'm a lifelong fan, I'm a sucker for the lore. If something is implemented throughout the entire franchise or really belongs in the story, in the Pokemon world, I like it a lot more, and I feel that more with Mega Evolution. You can tell with the story of the Galar region that gym battles are focused on Dynamaxing with one exception, but that even builds into it a bit more because like, oh, you don't Dynamax? Well, your city's kind of bunk, isn't it? And then they build like these massive stadiums to really capture the power of what's happening in Dynamax, and it looks a lot cooler when you have 2 Dynamax Pokemon staring each other down, launching crazy powerful attacks instead of just a Mega Pokemon that gets a little edgier and then does the same things. Or even with Z moves, Z moves, they just happen and it's done. There's a lot more weight behind Dynamax, and that's why I feel like it's more successful. Not even from just a competitive standpoint, but from how it's represented and how it would be in the Pokemon world. And my favorite thing about Dynamax is just how dynamic it is, because you can just use any Pokemon anytime, so you have to be aware of all of your strategic options and just kind of pull something out of your hat. But then you also have to realize the opponent can do the same thing, so it really puts a lot more pressure onto the skill, onto the adaptability of the battlers, and that's just better than like, alright, here's my one Mega that I'm always going to do, here's my only typing Z move that I can do things with, and then that's kind of it. So I do want to stress the viability that I've seen out of just like the random Pokemon that can Dynamax and then be usable off of just that Dynamaxing or other strategies that just kind of work. So far in doubles, like Dynamax Clefairy is one of the best Pokemon I've ever used, and no one would have ever expected it. So there's still like discoveries that can be made when setting up this Pokemon, and you can still get a lot of benefit out of that. Now I will say that Gigantamax has the same failings as Mega Evolution, but I don't really feel like it's as much of a waste. Like, if the Pokemon isn't usable with its Mega Evolution, it really feels like a waste. But since any Pokemon can Dynamax, you'll see the Gigantamax variant or the Dynamax variant of certain Pokemon, or you'll just see something random get a Dynamax and then suddenly become viable off of it. So, like, you're always engaging with the Dynamax feature, and it's not complete stress on, like, hey, you should be Gigantamaxing more than anything when the opportunity presents itself. So I just think like, yeah, some of these you just don't ever see, that just don't matter at all. G-Max Foam Burst is bad. Dynamax can't even save a Pokemon like Kingler. Garbodor was just there for plot. It's kind of cool to see some of the things that Game Freak went for, like Gravity. I really like Gravity strategies because like Gravity Hypnosis is super awesome, but since you are kind of giving up that Dynamax, some Pokemon are just better Dynamax and take advantage of that than others, so you really don't see Orbeetle doing that, and Orbeetle is more of a status Pokemon anyways, so it doesn't want to go offensive and set all those things. So I mean, like, yeah, kind of doesn't work, but you'll still see like Volcalith from the Colossal, or you'll just see, like, you'll see Dynamax Colossal with the Surf Weakness Policy strats, or sometimes you'll see Gigantamax. Like, I just don't feel disappointed, where it's like, oh, this Gigantamax Pokemon doesn't get used, it's a waste. However, when it comes to like the Mega Evolutions, it's like, man, Aggron went from meh to meh. Kangaskhan only exists because of its Mega Evolution, and poor Houndoom, man, this Pokemon just never gets the time to shine. But I feel like if Houndoom was in the game, it's like, yeah, there could still just be regular Dynamax Houndoom strategies, or if it got a good G-Max move, that then becomes just like more viable, more off of the Dynamax, but then the G-Max kind of pushes it over the edge. And some of the Gigantamax are still like really strong, mostly Lapras. Lapras is really good. G-Max Replenish, keeping Snorlax up. So, I mean, they still had successful implementations, but you don't only see G-Max Lapras. Someone will just Dynamax a normal Pokemon instead. So it doesn't have the same oppression, and it doesn't take away from the slots. And maybe it's just because it's a silly gimmick. You know, I want my edgy, cool, mega Pokemon to kind of expand the Pokemon world, but if, you know, G-Max Sandaconda is rare, and Dynamax itself is a kind of abstract phenomenon in the Pokemon world, I'm okay if I don't experience this Pokemon, but then it's like, when it comes to a Mega not being experienced, it feels like a lot more wasted potential. So I think that there's a different feel behind it, not exclusively competitive as to why it's bad, but, you know, it's just like, yeah, Gigantamax not happening isn't the end of the world. A Mega not happening feels bad. And I think that's kind of it. We went over all the topics. I got to talk about it. Do I want to rate these things? Like, yeah, it's easy to rate after what I've gone through. Dynamax, oh, maybe it's not. Like, regional variants Dynamax tied for 1 and 2. I feel like overall, Dynamax has just been better for the all of Pokemon than all the regional variants. Like, not every regional variant is amazing. I feel like there's some missed opportunities. I feel like there aren't enough regional variants, but keeping it as a concept where it's like, yeah, you can always revitalize and update a Pokemon. I would just like to see regular evolutions to existing Pokemon, like Generation 4 as well. So, as long as regional variants aren't crunched too much, still really nice. Dynamax has just made Pokemon fun again. And then Z-moves, then Mega Evolution. Because I don't think we got to experience Z-moves without Mega Evolution, and lone Z-moves would have felt a lot better. And again, Fan Fridays, like, we've seen the coolest combos. We've seen the most creativity out of Pokemon from Z-moves, even though it really sucked as a mechanic. And then Mega Evolutions, I just kind of classify as a failure in the end. And I think it's good that Game Freak is phasing it out, instead of keeping it along for Generation 9, Generation 10, however many decades, you know, it still exists. It still exists. You just don't get to play with it competitively because it didn't work competitively. And like we saw with Z-moves, it doesn't really play nice with anything else. And again, if you just kind of add, I think there's also a big problem. Like, if you keep adding Gigantamax Pokemon, you don't really have any feelings of missing out. But when you keep adding Mega Pokemon, it's like, oh, cool. Now there's 80 Megas. Now there's 100 Megas in Generation 10, and I only get to use one of them. I think that's another problem with Megas. It doesn't scale. Dynamax, it can just scale, and it can scale indefinitely, and you're not going to feel bad about it. Megas, it doesn't scale. It's not balanced. It doesn't play nice with any of the other features. It doesn't consolidate, so it just kind of fails everywhere. And it even feels like Game Freak was trying to rewrite it immediately with how punishing the lore is on the Pokemon. So, hope you guys enjoy the video. Hope you all have a nice day. Thank you very much for watching.